This episode is for all my entrepreneurs out there, especially if you're building a business and you are feeling burned out of the social media hamster wheel that requires you to be constantly churning out so many posts that are here today and then gone in a matter of hours. Or maybe you never really loved social media anyway, but you're wondering, well, how else are people supposed to find me? How do I get in front of the people who I can help and who can become clients? Well, the strategy that my guest and I get into today is completely independent from social media. It has nothing to do with social media and in many ways is way more effective than social media because for one thing, it will help you to get in front of people at the exact moment that they are looking for the solution that you provide. It also has a way longer shelf life, meaning the effort that you put in now will continue to pay off for a long time, like months or years, rather than the few hours or maybe a day that you get with social media. So my guest today is Meg Casebolt, and Meg is the founder of Love at First Search, and she is also the host of the Social Slowdown podcast. So Meg specializes in helping businesses to spend less time trying to hack those algorithms and instead create SEO content that attracts ideal clients to their website, while also helping entrepreneurs to just cut that dependency on social media for their business visibility. I think you're going to love sitting in on my conversation with Meg, so let's get into it. Well, hey, Meg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, I am so excited to get into this conversation because we're going to be talking about a marketing strategy that's so good and so effective for all of the, entrepreneurs, wellness entrepreneurs in my audience, but it is one that I think that people may have not considered before or really maybe even heard of before. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on my show is because I hear from people all the time in my community that they are just completely exhausted posting on social media all the time and getting so little traction and just like such a brief shelf life for all of that work, like for that content. And I know, and you know, Meg, that it can be so much more effective to focus on platforms that give people's content a longer shelf life, right?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of if you're going to spend the time to create content for your social media, also put it in a place where people can access it in a much longer term way. I think LinkedIn is the social media that has the longest shelf life and it's 24 hours, whereas Twitter, I think, is something like 18 minutes that it really shows up in people's feeds. So if you're going to create content for social media, you may as well also turn it into some sort of content that has a long-term approach, like a podcast or a video or a blog post or something that can live on and be found on some sort of search-friendly platform like Apple Podcasts, like you and I are having this conversation now, or on your website through a blog post. There are a lot of different ways that we can utilize and repurpose that information so you're not just having this super fast turnover time and needing to create something new all the time.
Totally. We really get kind of like stuck in this social media mindset that that's the only thing that we have to do it. It's the only thing that's going to make sense. I think we're going to talk a bit more about all this stuff. But before we get too far down the rabbit hole, let's just give our audience a little bit of context. So maybe just tell us a bit about the work that you're doing in the world, Meg, and what brought you to this point in your career.
Sure. So my name is Meg Casebolt. I'm the founder of Love at First Search. We are an online business that helps other businesses to show up in search results. So search engines like Google, like YouTube, like Apple Podcasts, we want to help businesses to get their traffic coming to their websites through those search engines versus feeling like they always have to be promoting themselves on social media. I also have my own podcast called Social Slowdown, which is dedicated to this idea of, social media is not bad, it's not wrong, but it shouldn't be the only marketing strategy that we have. I think sometimes it can feel like, well, that's the cafeteria where the cool kids are hanging out, so I have to be there. And we aren't necessarily having the conversations about, well, there's also kids hanging out in the computer lab and the library and the gym and other places that maybe aren't the most popular choices, but they're still out there. And you might have a good chunk of your audience that wants to find you and wants to work with you, but I think more and more people are moving off of social media, or they don't even know what to look for to find you on social media. So having those alternative strategies is something that I feel is really powerful and really important.
I love that. And I 100% agree. I mean, it feels like it's the thing that you're supposed to be doing. I mean, I hear this from so many people. Like when people come to me and we start working together and, or they join a program and I ask them, well, what are you doing for marketing? Like, and they equate that with social media marketing.
Yes.
It's like, it's synonymous in a lot of people's minds. It's like, well, I haven't done much marketing before because I don't like social media. I'm like, that's not the only way to market.
Don't do social media. That's okay.
Right, exactly. But it's just, we need to disentangle the concept of like being visible and marketing ourselves with being on social media, because that's just one tool, like one way to do it. So I'm super excited.
And when you think about yourself as a consumer, it's like, let's say that you're going to look for a health coach, look for a doctor, look for a Reiki practitioner. Are you going to go on Instagram and search for a Reiki practitioner and read through all their back posts and learn about the education around it and then maybe like schedule a call? No, you're probably going to like, especially if it's something local, you might go and just look at Google Maps.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be involved. You don't need to have social media be involved in it. Now, social media can be a great place to nurture your existing audience, to stay top of mind with them, to continue that education. But oftentimes when people are looking for a quick solution, they just go to search engines. They're not even, Facebook is not a part of that conversation, you know?
I do know. And I'm so glad to hear you say that, because this is exactly what I tell people all the time. Social media, like, just to be clear, right? We're not making it be that social media is wrong and it has no role. Like you said, it definitely can have a role. And I definitely say the same thing, like that it's useful for nurturing and for kind of that brand elevation. And because people who do already know about you often go and check you out on social media to see what you're doing and what your vibe is and if they're kind of feeling aligned with you. But I find it's pretty rare that somebody is like, that's the first spot where they see you, where they get exposed to you, because organic reach is so bad anyway. But yeah, so okay, so let's talk about what the other things, like what are the things in particular. I would love to hear you talk about Cornerstone content and SEO and like content marketing and all of those juicy things that are maybe not as sexy, like you said, in the cafeteria,
they're so not sexy.
where all the cool kids are hanging out. Like there's nothing sexy about it, but is it effective? Yeah. So let's hear about that. Tell me all about this.
SEO is like the library nerds of our online business school. We're the ones who are like, oh, computer lab, no, like we're pushing the glasses up our noses.
Totally.
I say it out of love because it's who I am too. I am like head over heels Ravenclaw. So let's talk about, if we have a way that we want to communicate with our audiences, if we have a way that we want to be discovered by our audiences, if we have a message that we think will resonate with our audiences. There is both outbound marketing, which is things like social media, especially ads, where you're sort of pushing into people's worlds, direct mail or billboards, where you're entering into their lives, pushing into it. And then on the other hand, you have inbound marketing, which is people signing up for your email list, or they are on their way to find you. And I like to think of search marketing as much more inbound. Somebody is looking for a solution to a problem that they're experiencing. And that might be something as simple as, looking for a massage therapist in their town, or it might be like, my back hurts.
Right.
Maybe they don't know what the solution is or who they would be looking for, but they know that something is wrong. I can't lose weight. I can't sleep. We're talking to health coaches.
Yeah.
My poop looks weird.
Yes.
Health coaches love to talk about poop. Right?
I know. Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I've done the keyword research. I've looked at what people search for. There's so many questions that people go to Google for about their poop because they don't want to go to their friends and put on Facebook like, my poop's floating,
Oh, exactly. That is the place where you go if you're having problems because it's, confidential and, all that stuff. So, okay.
Right.
Yes,
it's confidential. It's not judgmental. People will go, they'll look especially for things that can feel a little bit more, that it could be a little bit more private, that they don't want to make it. Maybe there's a little bit of shame around some of the things that they're Googling, and they go to a place like Google and they search for whatever the problem is. And the results that show up, the more specific those results are that show up, the more likely people are to trust that that person has an understanding of that problem.
Yes. Okay.
So, depending on, it's not just like, oh, I have a stomach ache, right? You're going to get Mayo Clinic showing up there, and it's going to probably tell you that you have stomach cancer, and then you're going to freak out.
Always cancer.
Everything's cancer on Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, if you follow through, it's cancer or syphilis. It always ends in like either cancer or syphilis. Those are the things. Everything.
We're getting real medical here.
Yep.
But, if you get more specific, then you can create content that brings people into your website that can answer those really specific things, that can get more detailed than something like a WebMD, because you're able to really understand the specifics of a very niche audience. If you're working with people on as a dietitian for women who are going through menopause, and you want to help them use acupuncture to decrease their hot flashes, like, you can get that level of detail in the content on your website, that people who are going through that exact problem at that exact moment can come seek you out, instead of you needing to show up in their feed somewhere at the right moment.
Right. I love that. It's very specific. It's like laser focused on exactly the problem. And you are showing up where and when they need you, not when they're scrolling because they're standing in a lineup and they're looking to be entertained, and they're like, oh, they come across you randomly and it's like maybe not quite right. But this is like they're looking for a solution. They have got something that they need some help with, and they're actively seeking you out. And there you magically are. Okay, so tell us about the magic piece, and like how do we do that? How do we be the person who shows up when they are looking for that solution?
Well, you really have to understand who it is that you're talking to.
Right.
And I've spoken to a number of health coaches, especially right after they get out of like integrative health school, and they're like, well, I can help people with anything. And I'm like, okay, cool. But people don't have problems with everything.
Yeah.
I don't go to Google and say like, I feel unhealthy today.
Right.
Right. There is a specific thing that is happening in my mind, in my body, in my life, that is driving me to make some sort of change, to seek out some sort of answer. Very rarely do people just go like, I just want to improve my supplementation. They're like, no, I need a supplement for sleep, for joint pain, for, like, when you can understand the specific problems that your audience has, then you can create content that can get as specific as you need it to be, where it's like joint pain for runners over 50 with rheumatoid arthritis, right? And you can get to that level of detail. And then you can create a spin-off post that's joint pain for runners over 50 with lupus, right?
Right. Yes.
You can create this hyper targeted content that makes people feel seen and valued and validated.
Yeah.
And then once you have these building blocks, I'm sort of like making up these examples as we go, but let's say that you have the joint pain for runners over 50 with 6 or 7 different conditions. Then maybe you want to take those building blocks and build them into a larger piece of content, which is what we nerds in the SEO world refer to as cornerstone content, which would be just joint pain relief for runners over 50. And then you could go through and list out, if you have any of these 7 conditions, here's what you need to know. And you can link to those existing posts. And when you take those smaller building blocks and you build something slightly larger out of them, that's how you can rank for more difficult keywords. So it's not just joint pain for runners over 50, blah, blah, blah. You can start to rank for joint pain, which is going to be a bit more generic.
Okay, so when you say difficult keywords, you mean like more competitive keywords, that there's like a lot more content out there on the market, so it's hard for you to rank anywhere like on.
Yeah, either more generic or more competitive. So it can be like more of an overarching core idea, almost like a category that you talk about. You can do better with it if you have some of these links that come together, or what we were talking about with like the WebMD, Mayo Clinic types of websites. If you look at the way that they're structured, it's often, we're going to talk about this overarching idea, and then we're going to have a lot of supporting documentation that's linked to from that. And that gives people the chance to sort of see the overarching idea, but then go down the rabbit holes of, these are the symptoms and this is the diagnostic criteria, and sort of get into the details that it's interesting to them. But the overview content, that sort of almost table of contents post, can do really well to get an overarching idea of everything that you need to know about that topic. That's what we're talking about with Cornerstone content.
Okay, that makes sense. This is coming together for me. So from there, like, so there's this one bigger piece that's could potentially be more broad and or generic and or competitive, would be hard for you to get that piece of content seen just because of the nature of those elements. But when it's more like a compilation of a bunch of different, smaller, more specific pieces, and you've kind of brought them all together, and then from when people land there, then they can kind of choose their own adventure, see which pieces they would like to read a little bit more about. And that helps the whole SEO machinery to actually help you with that piece of content, getting that seen. Is that kind of
That's
the way?
exactly right. Yeah.
Okay,
I have let me give an example. So I have
Yes.
a client who is an intuitive eating coach, and she did a podcast series where she talked about the 10 principles of intuitive eating, and she created a podcast episode for each of the 10 principles. So not just eating to be full, but eating the foods that you want to eat, and not just the ones that are supposedly healthy. And so each of those podcast episodes would have its own title.
Yeah.
But then she took that 10 episode series and created blog posts for each of them as well. So that way they can be found both in the podcast and on the text-based search engines like Google. And then she created a blog post that was sort of that compilation. I love that term you use, the compilation of the 10 rules of intuitive eating, an introductory guide. And she linked to each of those blog posts from that compilation, from that table of contents, with a short description of, here's the blog post about how to choose what you're going to eat, and here's the blog post about what time of day, and here's the, and sort of just allowed people to see everything that she'd already created on the topic, with the hope and the structure, not just hope, this isn't hope, this is also the way that you structure this stuff, that if people went and Googled intuitive eating, it wouldn't be all 11 of those posts, the 10 podcast episodes plus the overview. If you're in a topic that a lot of people have written about, you're not going to get items 1 through 10 on the Google search engine results, but you can choose one post that you want to be the definitive post where you include all that information.
Right.
And that post will be more likely to rank in those top search results.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm wondering now, like, what comes first, like this chicken and egg kind of scenario? Do you create, like, if you as a content creator, are you creating those micro posts, like the small pieces first, and then putting them all together, or do you have, like, would you recommend creating the cornerstone piece first and then kind of like adding to, like, how would this all come together?
My personal approach is to create the smaller pieces and then build something bigger out of them.
Okay.
But I know that that's just what works for my brain.
Right.
That some people may want to create an entire outline and just go bang, bang, bang. I like to think of it almost like when you're crocheting a blanket. It's like some people have a blanket that's like you're making all the separate granny squares, and then you're taking your yarn and you're knitting them together. And some patterns are like you're just going one row a day based on the temperature, right? Like both of them are blankets. Both of them can get done in the same amount of time. It's just, do you want it to be in squares or rows?
Okay, so it can go either way. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. Now, but how would you know, like, how does somebody know which content works best together? Like, if we're creating this cocktail mixture, what is it, which pieces, or how do you pick which content it would be best to include in a Cornerstone page?
I like to look at what you already have. And also think about what your core messaging is. So if you have, if you have a podcast, or, you've done a series of videos and you know that you have a series, then that might be a good time to create Cornerstone content. Sometimes I even like to say to people, like, what are your Instagram story highlights? Those are the topics that would be really good for a Cornerstone post. What are the things that you just keep coming back to? What are the things that you feel like you're an expert in, but maybe people don't know that you're an expert in it, and you want to create some sort of guide to it? Something that, or if you're the kind of person who has blog post categories, like what are the blog post categories where you have 10 things that are already living in that topic? Okay, let's create, instead of just having a category page on your website, maybe create almost like a thread that ties together everything in that category. That's a narrative that ties it together. That tends to do better when Google has more words on a page than just here's a list of posts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because we kind of already have, like, if you have a blog or, somewhere, your content you can segment it into playlists or into like
Yes.
categories of blog posts or tags and that kind of thing. And it can automatically be done for you. Or you can just be intentional about it and actually pull things in, but create its own piece of content itself with all those bits and pieces.
Exactly. And sometimes when you sit down and start to go, okay, I've audited my content. I have this idea. I love the
Mhm.
idea of a playlist where it's like, okay, here's steps 1, 2, and 3, and then step 5. But I'm missing step 4. I need to create whatever step
Right.
4 is. Sometimes when we sit down to create that outline or a kind of an audit, it can give us those ideas of what are the gaps that we need to create too. Or you can sit down and write that narrative and then realize as you're writing it, oh, I have a framework and I didn't even realize I had a framework, but this is it. So let me build this out a little more. Let me build more content for it. I have these 3 pillars, which I teach all the time. I have a lot of people who have frameworks. They love them.
Yes.
There's my Ravenclaw coming back. Right? But if they come into me and they say, I have this 3-pillar framework, okay, what are in those 3 pillars? What have we already created for each of them? Oh, usually people have some sort of like top heavy, they talk more about this than this. Okay, let's build this one out a little bit more and then flesh it out in the content. So it's not necessarily that you need to walk out, I'm going to create Cornerstone content today and I'm going to go create every single piece of content in a row. Sometimes you start with what you have, you find the gaps, and then you fill in those holes.
Right. So you don't have to have it all done. This is another thing, it's another trap of like perfection, needing to have it all perfectly ready to go before it actually becomes a real thing. But you can start where you are, like you said, look at what you're at, what you have, and then you can add to it and, augment and like flesh it out even more as you go. That's very cool.
Right. I think sometimes it can be a little tough if you're working off content that is video or audio, because once you record it, it can be hard to replace it. Not so much with audio, you can usually re-upload files, but like with YouTube, you're not going to just re-upload a file.
Right.
But for anything that's on your website is dynamic. This isn't a book that you're publishing and you're putting in a print guide and you're sending out to people in the mail. You can always go in and add more. You can always go in and update. When I talk about search engine optimization, when it comes to creating content that's really search friendly, it's optimization. It's not creation.
Right.
It's this opportunity to always be improving. Nothing has to be perfect. You can go create something, and then we're not going to talk too much about this part of the geek out of SEO. You can go create something and then go look at your metrics and be like, oh, it's ranking for this. Let me go update that and optimize it, right? Like,
yeah,
nothing is final. And that's one of the things that's great about the internet,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You can be constantly reinventing and updating and iterating and improving as you go. But if you have, I think a lot of us have a perfectionist tendency and want things to be right on the first step out the door, and that can hold us back.
Yeah.
So you can let go of some of that like perfectionist procrastination and like publish and see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. Perfect. And I'm curious, like, how effective is this? Like, when did you first start to see that this kind of strategy, like creating a piece of Cornerstone content, like when did you see that was effective? Like, how much of a difference can this make for somebody?
Well, this is something I've been teaching in a lot of my SEO programs for a long time, and we definitely see that even when we're just pulling together those threads, my clients come into me with the granny squares, and I'm like, all right, here's your quilt pattern. Okay, I just switched media. It felt better with quilting somehow to have a pattern. I don't know. But when we do that, we can see a big uptick just by setting up the structure of the page. We can start within 3 months to see new traffic coming in for some of those terms. I also have a Cornerstone guide that we created last summer, which is my 15-point approach to a website, where it was a completely accidental Cornerstone guide. I had 3 friends in real life independently all say to me, what do I need to know to build a website? And I started creating, I've created a blog post about how to choose your domain. And I created one about whether to be on WordPress or Squarespace. And I created one about, yeah, this is a Cornerstone guide.
Right.
It started as an email to my next door neighbor who was starting a health coaching business, right? Like,
that's awesome.
And then I was like, okay, well, let me figure out what my framework is. Oh, it's actually a 15-part system. Which I didn't realize until I started writing it out. And then it became, and if you go to loveitfirstsearch.com, it's our SEO website guide. It's right there on the homepage. You can just go look at sort of what this looks like. But we broke it down into, here's a table of contents and here's the 15 parts, and you can leap ahead to whatever part makes sense to you and then go down that rabbit hole. So if you already have the website, you can skip ahead from like, I don't need to worry about this like WordPress or Squarespace thing, but like, how do I write the copy that will be found in search? Or how do I structure the menu, right? Like, we had all that content just kind of splashed around the website, and building it into something that people could follow was both good for people finding that information. It was a really good resource that hundreds of people have now downloaded it just as a PDF guide. I didn't do anything different about it. It's all right there on the website, but it's really long, so people wanted it as a PDF. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And we say in the middle of it, we're like, does this sound hard? Do you want to help? Do you want help? Because we can help you. And it converts, So it's not necessarily just this is the way to get increased traffic to a specific search term. Sometimes it can just say like, it can be proof of your expertise. And give people a roadmap to follow. So there's a lot of benefits to having this sort of expert content in an organized way that has a good user experience that people can follow along on your website, not just for being discovered, but also for getting new clients from it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because it's not just like traffic for traffic's sake, unless you are running that kind of a website, I guess. But I mean, for most of the people in my audience, like there's a real reason why they want people to find them online and traffic to come to their site, so that they can start to make those relationships and those connections, build their community, and then convert into clients. So that beyond just the numbers of SEO, that actually having that piece of Cornerstone content, I think it's also like a authority positioner, right? Because if you have created something that's like the ultimate guide, that is really comprehensive, versus we all have this experience, right, of like searching for something and you find this little teeny snippet and this little teeny thing, and you're trying to piece it together. And there's good and bad about that too, but to also have like this ultimate guide kind of thing, it really positions you as an authority on that topic. So I love that too.
And if people can find it, they can share it. You can become known for it.
Yeah.
Which makes a huge difference in your brand awareness and in your trustworthiness.
Yeah. You also had said, I think you said you can start to see results though in about 3 months, or as quick as 3 months. Like I know that people are curious about how long, if I'm doing these kinds of strategies and I'm working to optimize all this stuff, I know it's not overnight, but like what is like a realistic time frame, just so that people don't, because what I don't want to see people is like they work on this and then they just kind of like give up because they're like, this isn't working. So what's a realistic time frame?
Realistic time frame, it's hard to say. I like to say not overnight, but not forever.
Right. Somewhere in there.
Right. Totally helpful. It's like, when does a cucumber become a pickle? I don't know. My approach to it is, what do you already have? If you're starting from scratch and you're saying, I want to be found for the word health, it's going to take you 10 years of daily blog posts to overcome some of those larger websites. Right. But for those of us who are service providers, for those of us who have very specific niches, either, geographically, we work with people in person and we only need to be found by people in Roanoke, Virginia. Okay, I can, within 6 months, depending on what you're doing in Roanoke, Virginia, you'll probably be able to be found in Roanoke, Virginia, maybe all the way to Lynchburg, right? Like, it doesn't need to be the entire world. If you're, again, the runners over 50 who have joint pain, then you can create everything you need to know for runners over 50 with joint pain in a couple of months, and Google will pay attention. It's about what you already have, what your authority already is, who else has talked about it, And depending on all of those, how long you've owned your website, how long your competitors have owned their website. So there isn't really a clear answer of,
Okay.
in 3 to 6 months, everyone will get these results. But the more specific you are and the higher quality content that you create that answers direct questions, you can have a blog post take off in a week. You can update your website and in 2 weeks start getting clients from it. I actually just had somebody in one of my programs who went through and just updated her Google business profile. And now she already has 8 new leads in 2 weeks for Reiki practitioners in her town because she hadn't said that she was a Reiki practitioner in her town. And now she does.
Right. Oh my gosh. Simple shifts, right?
Simple shifts that sometimes we as business owners are so close to what we do.
Too close.
And we try to be clever and we try to be everything to everyone. And we forget those basic things that, that need to be said.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great reminder. I mean, this has been so fun, Meg. Like, I know that we said that this wasn't a sexy topic, but I actually think that we brought the sexy to this topic, and I think it was really fun. And it feels really doable. Like, honestly, my wheels are turning. I'm like, oh, I could do this with in a bunch of different ways that I'm thinking about now. And I'm sure that many people in my audience are thinking the same thing. So this has just been so great. So many useful takeaways in there. Of course, before I let you go, tell us where people can go to learn more about you and connect with you and all of those things.
Sure. So you can find us over at Love It First Search. We have an SEO starter kit that you can find at loveitfirstsearch.com/start. It's usually a really good place to get started. Or, go to the homepage. You can check out that Cornerstone guide just to get an idea of what it is that we were talking about. Or since I know we're podcast listeners, you can also head over to your Apple or, your podcast player of choice and look for me under the Social Slowdown podcast, where I start to explore a lot of these options for how to use relationship building, content marketing, repurposing the things that you already have so that you don't have to be as reliant on social media.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, definitely. I'll link all of that stuff in the show notes because those are some great resources. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us, Meg. This has just been fantastic. I hope that you enjoyed sitting in on my conversation with Meg. I would love to hear your thoughts on what we discussed, and I'm curious to know if this is a strategy that you are going to try to put into practice. If you were going to create a piece of Cornerstone content, what would it be about? What would the focus be? If you're watching on YouTube, then just drop me a comment below this video, or if you're listening to the audio of this episode, then find me on Instagram and let me know. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to continue this conversation. Okay, that's a wrap for today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you again very soon.